I didn't realize something was wrong until someone stopped trusting me without ever saying it. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the silence between us felt different, like something had quietly shifted, and I didn't know when it happened. It started on a normal Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk, coffee going cold, half listening to a meeting I had already heard a dozen versions of before. Same ideas, same voices, same predictable rhythm. I remember thinking this could have been an email. My coworker Daniel was presenting something he'd clearly worked hard on. Slides, data, a few jokes sprinkled in to keep it light. People nodded politely. And then he paused. "Any thoughts?" he asked. And there was that moment, the one I always stepped into. I leaned forward slightly, muted my mic for a second out of habit, then unmuted. "Yeah," I said. "I think it's good, but there are a couple things that might cause issues later." I didn't think much of it. I never did. I started pointing out what could go wrong. A potential gap in the data, a timing issue, a scenario that might not play out the way he expected. To me, it felt helpful, responsible even. I remember thinking, someone has to say it. But something about Daniel's face changed, just slightly. Not anger, not even frustration, just something quieter. He nodded, thanked me, and moved on. The meeting ended like always. People dropped off. The screen went blank. But that small shift stayed with me longer than it should have. At the time, I didn't question myself. In my mind, I was just being realistic. I wasn't negative. I wasn't trying to tear anyone down. I just saw things clearly. At least that's what I told myself. I had always been that way. Even growing up, I was the one who noticed the flaws. The one who asked, "But what if it doesn't work?" when everyone else was excited. Teachers called me analytical. Friends called me honest. I wore both labels like a quiet badge of pride. Because in a world where people ignored problems, I thought I was the one paying attention. I remember thinking, I'm just more aware than most. And for a long time, that belief felt true. But then small things started happening. Nothing dramatic, just patterns. People stopped asking for my opinion. Not immediately, not obviously. It was subtle. In meetings, others spoke first. Decisions were made faster. Conversations wrapped up without that pause where someone would usually say, "Let's hear what you think." At first I thought, maybe they're just getting more confident. But then it happened outside of work too. A friend told me about a business idea he was excited about. I listened, nodded, and said, "It sounds interesting, but have you thought about how competitive that space is?" He hesitated, then said, "Yeah, I guess." The energy dropped. The conversation moved on. I didn't notice it in the moment, not fully, but later that night it replayed in my head. That small hesitation, that slight withdrawal. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that didn't sit well. Why do people seem less excited after talking to me? I tried to brush it off. It's easy to protect your identity when you've believed something about yourself for years. I told myself, people just don't like hearing the truth. That explanation felt comfortable, safe. It meant I didn't have to change anything. But something didn't add up. Because these weren't strangers. These were people who used to come to me, people who trusted me. And now they still talk to me, but differently, less openly, less enthusiastically, like they were filtering something. The real turning point came a few weeks later. It was late. I was at a small diner, the kind with dim lighting and quiet conversations that blend into the background. I was sitting across from my sister. She had this habit of watching people closely when she talked to them, not in an intense way, just enough to notice things others might miss. We were catching up, talking about nothing important. Then she mentioned she'd been thinking about switching careers. She sounded excited. I listened, and without even thinking, I said, "That's a big risk though. Starting over like that isn't easy." She didn't respond right away. She just looked at me. Not annoyed, not even upset, just thoughtful. Then she said something I still think about. "You always do that." I frowned slightly. "Do what?" She leaned back a little. "You don't let people enjoy things for even a minute before you show them what could go wrong." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because for the first time, I didn't have a defense ready. We sat there in silence for a few seconds. I remember feeling this strange mix of confusion and discomfort, because I didn't see myself that way. I wasn't trying to shut people down. I thought I was helping, protecting them even. But her words stayed there in the air, and the more I replayed my recent conversations in my head, the more they started to look different. Daniel in the meeting, my friend with the business idea, even small everyday moments, someone sharing good news, a plan, an idea, and me responding the same way. Not with excitement, not with curiosity, but with caution, with correction, with a quiet shift from possibility to problem. That night, I couldn't shake the thought. What if I'm not being helpful, just predictable? That question bothered me more than anything else, because predictability sounds harmless, but in people, it changes how people feel around you. I started noticing something I had ignored before. When people share something personal or exciting, they're not always looking for accuracy. They're looking for a moment of being seen, a moment of feeling understood. And without realizing it, I had been interrupting that moment over and over again. The next day, I decided to try something different. Nothing dramatic, just one small change. In another meeting, someone shared an idea. I felt that familiar instinct rise up, the urge to point out what could go wrong. It was automatic, almost like a reflex. But this time, I paused, just for a second, and instead of saying what I usually said, I asked, "What made you think of that?" It felt strange, unnatural even, but the response surprised me. They lit up, started explaining their thinking, their process, their excitement. The conversation grew instead of shrinking. Other people joined in, and for once, I wasn't the one redirecting it towards problems. I was just part of it. That moment stayed with me because it showed me something I hadn't understood before. There's a difference between being right and being useful. I spent years focusing on being right, spotting flaws, anticipating issues, preparing for worst-case scenarios. And in some situations, that's valuable. But in everyday human interactions, it can quietly create distance, not because people hate honesty, but because timing matters, energy matters, and how you make people feel matters more than how accurate you are. Over time, I started catching myself more often. Not perfectly, but enough to notice the pattern. That instinct to correct, to warn, to analyze. It never fully disappears, but now I see it for what it is. A habit, not a personality trait, not a fixed identity, just something learned, something repeated, something that can be changed. And the strange part is, when I stopped leading with what's wrong, people didn't become less realistic. They just became more open, more willing to share, more comfortable around me. Daniel started asking for my input again, but at the right time. My friend revisited his business idea, and this time I listened before I analyzed. Even my sister smiled more when she talked about her plans, not because I changed who I was, but because I changed when I chose to be that person. I used to think awareness meant pointing out every possible flaw. Now I think it's something quieter. It's noticing the moment in front of you and deciding what it actually needs. Sometimes it needs honesty. Sometimes it needs caution. But sometimes it just needs space to exist without being corrected. And maybe that's the trait most people never fix. Not negativity, not overthinking,
but this constant need to adjust everything immediately, to improve, correct, refine, before something has even had the chance to breathe. It feels productive, it feels intelligent, but it can quietly take something away from the people around you, something they don't always know how to explain. Now, whenever someone shares something with me, I ask myself a simple question. Is this a moment to analyze or a moment to understand? And the answer changes more than I expected. Because sometimes people don't remember what you said. They remember how quickly you turned their excitement into something else.
So I still wonder about that first moment. The one with Daniel. The one I almost ignored. How many small moments like that shape how people see us without us ever noticing? And how many of them could change if we just waited a few seconds longer before speaking?